The rain had been falling for hours, drumming against the window pane like the heartbeat of the lonely night. I sat on the worn-out couch in my small living room, staring at the old family photographs that lined the shelf. My name is Ella, and I used to believe that love could conquer everything. Poverty, loneliness, even betrayal. For 40 years, that belief was my strength, my reason to wake up each morning before the sun rose and drag myself to the textile factory downtown. My hands, blistered and raw, had sewn dreams into every piece of fabric I touched. Every stitch I made was for my son, Henry, my only child, my only reason for existing. His laughter used to fill this little house like sunlight, chasing away every shadow that tried to creep into my heart. But that laughter was gone now, replaced by a silence that screamed louder than any words. The last time I saw him, he looked at me as though I were nothing more than a burden, a piece of his past he wished he could erase. Sometimes I still hear his words echoing inside my head, sharp as knives. "You're going to rot here, Mom. The only way you're leaving is in a coffin." He said that with eyes so cold, I almost didn't recognize the boy I once held in my arms when he cried over a scraped knee. It's strange how quickly life can turn from warmth to ice. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when Henry would run to the door after school, his arms wide open, shouting, "Mom!" with that innocent joy only children know. I'd be in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup or hemming a dress, and the sound of his voice would melt away all the exhaustion of the day. I promised myself I'd give him the life his father never could. When Henry was 8, his father walked out the door with nothing more than a suitcase and a lie about coming back someday. He never did. That night, as Henry slept, I cried silently beside him and swore that my son would never feel abandoned again. I would be mother and father both, love enough for two hearts. And for years I kept that promise. I worked until my body ached, skipped meals so he could eat, stayed up sewing by candlelight to afford his school books. When he wanted new shoes because the other kids made fun of his old ones, I sold the only gold ring I had left from my wedding day to buy them. Seeing his smile the next morning was worth every sacrifice. Henry grew up to be a bright young man, full of ambition and dreams. He was everything I had hoped for, smart, polite, hardworking. I still remember the day he came home holding his college acceptance letter in trembling hands. "Mom, I did it," he shouted, and I threw my arms around him, crying tears of joy. I didn't tell him then, but I had already mortgaged the house to help pay for his tuition. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he would have the chance I never did. When he graduated years later, wearing that sleek black gown and cap, I was the proudest woman alive. As I clapped from the audience, my eyes blurred with tears, and I thought everything was worth it. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice. It all led to this moment. After graduation, Henry got a good job at an engineering firm. He used to visit me every weekend, bringing small gifts and stories about his work. I'd cook his favorite meals, chicken stew, mashed potatoes, the chocolate cake he loved since childhood, and he'd sit at the table, laughing, talking about the future. I thought we were still a team, still mother and son against the world. But I was wrong. The day he introduced Marlene to me, something shifted. She was beautiful, polished, confident, everything I was not. Her smile was practiced, her tone polite but distant, as if she were doing me a favor just by being there. When I reached out to hug her, she hesitated for a fraction of a second before allowing it. That hesitation told me everything. From that moment, I knew she saw me not as family but as an obstacle. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just imagining things, that I should be happy Henry had found someone to love. But deep inside, a storm began to brew, one that would slowly destroy everything I had built. At first, Marlene was subtle. She'd make small comments about how old-fashioned my house looked, or how she admired my simple way of living, though her tone made it sound more like pity. I tried harder to win her over. I learned her favorite dishes, bought her small gifts I couldn't really afford, and even offered to help plan their engagement party. But every time I reached out, she stepped back further. Henry didn't seem to notice. He was in love, blind to everything else. I began to see less and less of him. Our weekly dinners turned into once-a-month visits. Then came the day Marlene told me with her sweet, venomous voice, "Ella, you should really think about moving into a retirement home. You'd be more comfortable there." She said it as if she were offering kindness, but her eyes told another story, one of triumph, as though she had just conquered the final piece of her husband's past. I remember sitting alone that night, staring at the empty chair across from me, the chair where Henry used to sit as a boy, swinging his legs and talking about his dreams. I thought about all the years I had spent working, the holidays I had missed, the laughter that had once filled this house. All of it for what? For a son who no longer looked at me with love but with irritation, as if my very presence was an inconvenience. Still, I couldn't hate him. Even as my heart shattered, I told myself he was just lost, that Marlene's influence would fade, that my son, the boy I had raised with every ounce of love in me, would come back. But I was wrong. The worst was yet to come. The morning after that painful dinner, I woke up to a quiet that felt heavier than usual. The house creaked as if it too shared my sadness. I made coffee out of habit, even though there was no one to share it with anymore. The smell filled the small kitchen, stirring memories that hurt more than comforted. Every corner of that house carried echoes of Henry's childhood. The height marks on the doorframe where I used to measure his growth, the scuffed floor from his toy cars, the small drawing of a house and two stick figures labeled Mom plus Me that still hung proudly on the fridge. Sometimes I caught myself whispering to that drawing, as if the boy who made it could still hear me. "Where did you go, my Henry?" I would ask softly, but there was never an answer, only the ticking of the clock reminding me of time's cruel passage. Weeks passed like this, with silence as my constant companion. Henry rarely called anymore, and when he did, his voice was distant, impatient. "Mom, I'm busy. Marlene and I have a lot going on," he'd say, cutting the conversation short before I could even ask how he was. I tried to be understanding. He was a grown man now, with responsibilities and a life of his own. But deep inside, a small part of me screamed that something was terribly wrong. Love shouldn't fade like this. It shouldn't turn into cold politeness and obligation. Still, I refused to lose hope. When he told me they were expecting their first child, my heart leapt. Thought maybe this is it. Maybe this baby will bring us closer again. I began knitting small sweaters and socks, staying up late with my old needles clicking softly in the quiet. Every stitch carried a prayer, that my grandchild would know love, that my son would remember who he was. I wrapped each piece carefully in tissue paper and placed them in a box tied with a ribbon. When I called Henry to tell him, his reaction wasn't what I expected. "Mom, that's sweet, but you really don't have to go through all that trouble," he said. His voice had that same edge of discomfort, like my love was something embarrassing. "Marlene's planning everything. She wants the baby to have modern things. Designer stuff. Not handmade." He didn't say the last word cruelly, but it still cut deep. "Made." As if my touch was something cheap and outdated. "Of course," I whispered, forcing a smile he couldn't see. "Tell her congratulations." After hanging up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the unfinished blanket in my lap, tears falling onto the soft wool. The baby shower came and went. I wasn't invited. I found out through a picture Marlene posted online. Her in a sparkling white dress, surrounded by smiling friends, the caption reading, "New Beginnings." Henry stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his smile wide and bright. I zoomed in on his face, searching for the warmth I once knew, but it was gone. That night, I took the little box of baby clothes I had made and tucked it in the drawer of my nightstand. Maybe someday, when things were better, I'd give them to my grandchild myself. Until then, I'd wait. I had spent a lifetime waiting for Henry, waiting for him to come home from school, waiting for him to graduate, waiting for him to realize how much I loved him. What was a little more waiting now? When the baby was born, I wasn't told immediately. I found out 2 days later when Henry finally called. "It's a boy," he said flatly, as if announcing the weather. "His name's Lucas." My heart fluttered. "Oh, Henry, that's wonderful." I can come over and help, can't I? I can cook for you, take care of the baby while you rest. Mom, please, he interrupted, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. Marlene doesn't want too many visitors right now. She needs rest, and the baby needs peace. I bit my lip, swallowing the sting of rejection. Of course, I murmured. But maybe just for a few minutes. There was a pause, then a sigh. We'll see, he said and hung up. I waited by the phone for days after that call, hoping he would say, "Come over now, Mom." But he never did. The invitation never came. Months passed before I saw my grandson for the first time. And even then, it wasn't in person. Henry brought a framed photo when he came to visit one Sunday. The visit lasted less than half an hour. "He's beautiful," I whispered, tracing the tiny face in the photo with trembling fingers. "He looks just like you did, Henry." My son smiled faintly. "Yeah, everyone says that." There was pride in his voice, but none of it reached me. He didn't ask about me, didn't notice the dark circles under my eyes or the way my hands shook. When he left, he didn't hug me. He just said, "Take care, Mom," as if we were strangers parting ways after a polite conversation. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed through the house, louder than thunder. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment from the past. His first steps, his first day of school, the time he fell from his bike and ran crying into my arms. I had carried him through every heartbreak, every illness, every fear. And now he couldn't even bear to be in the same room with me for more than half an hour. I wondered what I had done wrong. Had I loved him too much? Smothered him? Or maybe love itself was the mistake, the kind that asks for nothing but ends up taking everything. I got up, walked to his old room, and sat on the edge of the bed. It still smelled faintly of the cologne he used in college, though the air was stale now. I looked around at the dusty trophies, the posters, the books he once read, and whispered into the dark, "I miss you, Henry. Please come back to me." But the only answer was silence. The following year was the loneliest of my life. My health began to fade, slowly but surely. The long hours I had spent hunched over sewing machines in that dim textile factory finally caught up to me. My back ached constantly, and some mornings I could hardly stand. But what hurt most wasn't my body. It was the emptiness of the days that stretched before me. The world outside went on without me. The laughter of neighborhood children echoed faintly through the window, and every sound made me think of Henry's childhood. Sometimes I imagined him walking through the door, holding little Lucas in his arms, saying, "Mom, we missed you." But the door never opened. Months went by without a single visit. I called once, maybe twice, but each time I was met with that same cold tone. "Mom, we're busy," he'd say. "You know how demanding work and a baby can be." Then silence. I'd sit with the phone pressed to my chest long after the call ended, pretending I could still feel the warmth of his voice. But there was nothing, just the empty hum of loneliness filling the air. When my health worsened, I ended up in the hospital. It was a minor stroke, the doctor said. Not fatal, but a warning. "You need care, Mrs. Davis," he told me gently, his eyes full of pity. "You shouldn't live alone anymore." I smiled weakly, pretending I had someone waiting for me at home. "My son will help," I said. "He's a good boy." But when I called Henry that night from my hospital bed, the truth shattered that illusion. "Mom, I'm sorry, but Marlene says it's not a good time," he said, his voice strained. "We can't take care of you right now. Lucas is teething and work's been insane." I felt my throat tighten. "I don't need much, Henry," I whispered. "Just a few days until I can walk properly again. I just need someone to help me home." There was a pause, then he sighed. "I'll send someone to check on you," he said. And he did, a stranger. A young woman from some care agency came 2 days later, paid for a week by my son. She was kind but distant. I could see the pity in her eyes when she noticed the family photos on the nightstand. I didn't explain. I didn't tell her that the man in those pictures, the smiling boy holding my hand, was the same man who couldn't find time to visit his sick mother. When I finally returned home, The house felt colder than ever. I moved slower now, each step a small victory. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that my illness would bring Henry closer, that he would realize how fragile life is, how quickly time slips away. But when I called him to tell him I was back, he didn't even answer. Days later I received a short text. "Glad you're okay, Mom. We'll visit soon." Weeks passed. Soon never came. I began to understand that I was no longer part of his life. I was a ghost, someone from a past he'd rather forget. The realization nearly broke me. Still, I couldn't stop loving him. I couldn't stop being a mother. One afternoon, when the pain in my back grew unbearable, I gathered all my courage and decided to visit him. It had been over 6 months since I had seen my grandson. I dressed carefully, putting on my nicest dress, the same one I wore at Henry's graduation. I baked a small cake, just like I used to when he was little, and wrapped a knitted blanket for Lucas. My hands trembled as I rang the bell at their large, modern house in the gated community. The door opened, and there stood Marlene. She looked even more polished than before, her hair in perfect waves, her face expressionless. "Ella," she said, her lips curling into a tight smile. "What a surprise." I smiled nervously. "I just wanted to see Henry and the baby. I brought something for him." She hesitated, glancing behind her. I could hear laughter inside. Marlene's mother probably, and maybe some friends. "Now isn't a good time," she said finally. "Henry's busy. We have guests." I looked past her shoulder, hoping to catch a glimpse of my son. And then I saw him, sitting on the couch, holding Lucas. For a moment our eyes met. My heart leapt. But then he looked away. He didn't stand. He didn't even smile. Marlene stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Ella, we've talked about this. You can't just show up unannounced. It's uncomfortable for everyone." Her words were sugar-coated poison. I felt my cheeks burn with shame. "I just wanted to see my family," I whispered. "I'm sorry if I—" "Please," she interrupted. "Don't make this harder." She shut the door slowly, gently, as if to spare me the sound. But the soft click felt louder than any slam. I stood there for a long time, clutching the cake in my trembling hands, the smell of it mingling with the salt of my tears. Finally I turned and walked back toward the bus stop, my legs heavy, my chest aching. People passing by probably thought I was just another old woman out for a walk. They couldn't see that my heart had just been buried alive. That night I couldn't bring myself to eat. I sat by the window, the untouched cake beside me, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I wondered if Henry was laughing at that very moment, if Lucas was saying his first words, if Marlene was tucking him into bed. And then I wondered if they ever thought of me at all. Maybe they told themselves I was fine, that I preferred being alone. Maybe that lie made it easier for them to live with what they'd done. I don't know. All I knew was that I had never felt more invisible in my life. I was a mother who had given everything, and now there was nothing left to give. Nothing but love, a love no one wanted anymore. Winter came earlier than usual that year, blanketing the town in a gray stillness that seeped into my bones. I spent most days wrapped in an old shawl, sitting by the window with a cup of lukewarm tea, watching the world outside move on without me. Snowflakes drifted softly past the glass, melting as they hit the pane, and I thought about how easily beautiful things disappeared. It had been months since I last saw Henry. I had stopped calling. Each unanswered call had carved a new wound into my heart, and I didn't have the strength to keep opening them. I told myself I was done waiting, that I would focus on myself, my health, my peace. But every time the phone rang, a flicker of hope still stirred inside me, even if it was just a telemarketer or a wrong number. Hope was a cruel companion, one that refused to die no matter how many times it was betrayed. Then one cold afternoon the doorbell rang. My hands trembled as I opened the door, half expecting a miracle. And in a way it was, though not the one I dreamed of. Henry stood there, tall and elegant as ever, but different somehow. His eyes were hard, his face set in a grim line. "Mom," he said shortly. My heart leapt. "Henry." "Oh, sweetheart, it's been so long." I reached out to hug him, but he stepped back, avoiding my touch. "We need to talk," he said. The tone of his voice made my stomach drop. We sat down in the living room, though I could barely breathe. He didn't even look around, didn't glance at the pictures or the worn furniture that had once made him so proud. He just stared at me, his jaw tight. "Marlene and I have been thinking," he began, "and we believe it's time to make some changes." My fingers tightened around the edge of my shawl. "What kind of changes?" I asked, my voice small. "This house," he said. "It's old, unsafe. You can't live here alone anymore. You're not young, Mom. You need proper care." At first I thought he was concerned that maybe after all this time he finally cared again. But then he continued, and I understood. "We've decided to sell the house," he said matter-of-factly. "You'll move into a senior facility. It's cleaner, safer, and you'll have company." My heart stopped. "Sell the house," I whispered, not believing my ears. "This house is my life, Henry. It's where I raised you. It's—" "Mom," he cut me off, his voice sharper now. "You can't keep clinging to the past. You'll be better off there." I stared at him, tears filling my eyes. "Better off? You're sending me away." "It's not like that," he said quickly, looking uncomfortable. "Marlene thinks it's the best decision. We already found a buyer. You'll get your share, of course." "Marlene thinks." Always Marlene. My blood ran cold. I looked at him, my son, my only family, and saw nothing of the boy I had raised. "You've already decided, haven't you?" I asked softly. He didn't answer. The silence was worse than any words could have been. The following weeks were a blur. Strangers came and went, assessing, measuring, taking photos of my home, my sanctuary, as if it were just another property to be listed. I watched them move through the rooms that held my memories, their voices echoing in spaces that had once been filled with laughter. I didn't protest. What would be the point? Henry stopped by once or twice, each time avoiding my eyes. Marlene came too, giving polite smiles that barely masked her satisfaction. "It's for your own good, Ella," she said sweetly, her gloved hand brushing imaginary dust off the mantel. "You'll make new friends, have activities, won't have to worry about bills or loneliness." I wanted to scream, to tell her that loneliness was something she had given me, not something I could escape by changing walls. But the words caught in my throat. I just nodded and said nothing. The day I left the house, I woke before dawn. The movers hadn't arrived yet, and the silence was almost unbearable. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs. I paused in Henry's old bedroom, now half empty, and ran my fingers over the carved initials on the window frame. H+M, for Henry and Mom. My vision blurred as tears fell onto the wood. I whispered, "Goodbye," knowing it was for more than just the house. It was a farewell to the life I had lived, to the woman I had been. When Henry arrived later that morning, I was sitting by the door with my small suitcase, waiting like a guest in my own home. "The facility is nice," he said, avoiding my gaze. "You'll have your own room, and they'll take care of everything." I nodded, unable to speak. He drove me there himself, though he barely said a word the entire ride. I stared out the window, watching the streets blur past, the same streets I had once walked with him, hand in hand, when he was a little boy. When we arrived, he helped me out of the car but didn't follow me inside. "I'll come visit soon," he said. I looked at him then, really looked, and realized I no longer recognized my son. There was no warmth in his eyes, no trace of the boy I had loved so fiercely. Only guilt, hidden behind indifference. I wanted to say so many things, to tell him I forgave him, to remind him that no matter what, I would always love him, but the words died in my throat. He gave a brief nod, then turned and left. I stood at the door, watching the car disappear into the distance, the cold wind biting at my cheeks. Inside, the nurse smiled kindly and took my arm. "Don't worry, dear," she said softly. "You'll get used to it here." But how do you get used to being forgotten? That night, as I lay in the narrow bed of my new room, I listened to the faint murmur of other residents in the hallway, the sound of shuffling feet, the creak of old bodies that had also been set aside. I wondered if they too had been left behind by those they loved most. Maybe we were all the same, mothers and fathers who had given everything, only to end up as memories collecting dust in someone else's life. I closed my eyes and let the tears come silently. Somewhere out there, my son was sleeping in a warm bed beside his wife, his child safe in another room. And here I was, alone, forgotten, waiting for a visit that might never come. Days turned into weeks, and weeks blurred into months. Life at the facility was a strange rhythm of sameness. The smell of disinfectant in the halls, the squeak of nurses' shoes, the steady hum of television sets that no one truly watched. The other residents were kind, but tired in spirit. We shared stories sometimes over tea, tales of children who had once promised to visit, of birthdays missed, of letters that never came. Each story was a mirror of my own pain, each face another reflection of what it means to be forgotten. I tried to write to Henry once, just a small letter. I hope you and Lucas are doing well. Miss you. I slipped in a drawing Lucas had made during one of his rare visits to me months ago. Days passed, then weeks. No reply. I told myself maybe he was busy, maybe the letter had gotten lost. But deep inside I knew the truth. I had become a ghost in his life, an obligation he no longer wanted to remember. My health began to decline. The doctor called it age-related weakness, but I knew it was something deeper, the slow fading of a soul that no longer had purpose. Food lost its taste, mornings lost their light. I often found myself staring out the window, watching the birds on the fence. They came and went freely, never staying too long, never belonging to one place. Envied them. Sometimes I imagined I could see Henry's house from that window, imagined Lucas running through the garden, his laughter echoing faintly across the wind. In my dreams, Henry would come for me, his arms open, saying, "Mom, I'm sorry. Let's go home." I'd wake up with tears on my face, realizing that the dream was kinder than reality ever would be. One rainy afternoon, as I sat by the window knitting, the nurse approached me with a hesitant smile. "Mrs. Davis," she said softly, "your son called." My heart jumped, the needles slipping from my fingers. "Henry," I whispered. "Yes. He said he might visit this weekend." I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat closed with emotion. "He's coming," I repeated to myself over and over, as if saying it would make it true. That entire week I felt alive again. I asked the nurse to help me pick a dress. I even baked a small batch of cookies in the kitchen, Henry's favorite, with bits of dark chocolate and almonds. Every day I watched the entrance from my window, waiting for the familiar car to appear. The weekend came, and I sat by the door from morning until the evening light faded. Each car that passed made my heart leap, only to shatter again when it drove away. Night fell and he never came. The cookies sat untouched on the table, growing cold. The nurse placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Maybe next week," she said softly. I nodded, but my heart knew better. "Maybe," I whispered, though I could barely keep the tears from falling. After that, something inside me went quiet. I stopped waiting by the window. I stopped knitting. Even the birds outside seemed to visit less often. My body grew weaker, and I began to spend most of my days in bed, drifting between dreams and memories. Sometimes I'd hear a child's laughter in the hallway and think it was Lucas, but it was only the television in the common room. I tried not to be bitter. I told myself Henry had his reasons, that he was doing what he thought was best. But at night, when the world was silent, the truth came creeping back, a whisper in my mind that said, "He forgot you." That was the cruelest part of love, not when it ends, but when it fades quietly, replaced by indifference. One evening I felt the end coming. There was a strange peace in it. No pain, no fear, just a deep, aching calm. I asked the nurse to bring me the small box I kept in my drawer. Inside were all the things that still mattered. A faded photograph of Henry as a boy, a lock of his baby hair, the hospital tag from the day he was born, and a tiny sweater I had knitted for Lucas. I held them close to my chest, feeling the weight of a lifetime pressed into those little pieces of the past. Tell my son I love him, I whispered to the nurse, though I knew she might never get the chance. As the light outside dimmed, I closed my eyes and let my thoughts drift. Back to a sunny afternoon long ago, when Henry was 5 years old, running through the garden, his laughter echoing through the air. I remembered his small hand in mine, his voice calling, "Mom, look at me." And for the first time in years I smiled. When they found me the next morning, I looked peaceful, they said, as if I had simply fallen asleep. They placed the box of memories beside me, as I had asked. The nurse later told me that a few days after my passing, a man had come to the facility asking for me. Henry. He had finally come, too late. When he was told I was gone, he stood there silently, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. He asked to see my room, and when he did, he sat beside the bed and wept. 4 hours. The nurse said he held the little photograph of himself as a boy and whispered over and over, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." He left the facility with red eyes and trembling hands, carrying the box I had kept close until the end. Weeks later, a small headstone was placed in the quiet cemetery near the old town, beneath the willow tree Henry used to climb as a child. The inscription was simple. Ella Davis. A mother's love never fades. Sometimes on quiet mornings, Henry drives there alone. He brings Lucas, now a little older, who asks, "Daddy, who's Grandma Ella?" Henry smiles sadly and tells him stories. Of the woman who sewed his clothes, who stayed up all night when he was sick, who gave up everything so he could have a better life. He doesn't tell him about the years he spent away, or the times he turned his back when she needed him most. Some truths, he knows, are too heavy for a child to carry. Instead, he holds his son's hand and whispers, "She loved you, Lucas, more than anything." And as the wind rustles the leaves of the willow above them, it almost sounds like a whisper, gentle, forgiving, eternal. "I know, my boy. I always did."